Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto. Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I'm your host, Callie Wright, and I am joined today by my co-host, Daniel Wolfsong.
Hello, lovelies.
Today we are talking about privilege. This super fun conversation that a lot of people have that makes a lot of people uncomfortable and a lot of people angry. We're kind of going head on. So...
This topic is more divisive than almost any other topic of social equality that I can think of.
And I'm sincerely hoping that after this episode, we'll get our first hate mail.
Oh.
So,
and considering everything that we've talked about, that should go to show folks just how ugly this can get.
Right. So, this segment, we're going to be talking about what privilege is and what privilege is not. Personally, I think that so much of the anger and the divisiveness and the rancor and the blood, guts, carnage, and all that sort of stuff that surrounds these conversations is because I think a lot of people misunderstand what we're talking about when we say things like check your privilege, or white privilege, or cis privilege, or straight privilege, or Christian privilege. So I think it's important to spend some time talking about not only what privilege is, but what privilege isn't, because I think what it isn't is just as important as what privilege is. So Daniel, if you want to kind of, I know you've kind of gathered a whole bunch of information for this. So if you want to kind of take that on first.
Sure. I think that the word privilege itself has a certain weight to it, and I think that's what a lot of folks respond to when they're not very well versed in the topic, because the first thing you think about when someone tells you to check your privilege or talks about you having privilege is, well, I'm not a privileged person. I haven't lived, I didn't grow up rich. I had to fight for a lot of things that I have now. Why do I have to be called privileged? And that's usually where the knee-jerk reaction begins and oftentimes ends, because then they shut down the conversation because they don't want to talk about it. But privilege basically is just social inequality, right? It's called privilege because one group benefits from a certain social inequality while another group suffers from it. And of course, the person benefiting from it, they're privileged in that regard, because there's always going to be the other group. Privilege only exists where on the other side of it, suffering exists, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah.
I think, and I also think that it's important to recognize that you can be privileged in some ways and underprivileged in other ways.
Intersectionality.
Right, which is pretty much the reason this show exists.
Yeah, exactly. That's another. I think you can't really have a healthy conversation about privilege without talking about intersectionality and what that is as well.
Right, and to define the word intersectionality is it's where certain issues intersect with each other. So, this show specifically is about the intersection of atheist issues and LGBT issues. So it's about the things that we have in common, the issues that intersect those two populations and those two movements. So, and you can talk about that in any certain group of people. I mean, there's intersectionality between racism and homophobia and transphobia, even though they're not the same thing. There's intersectionality in that they cause some of the same problems and they stem from some of the same attitudes. So I think one thing that's important to note about, what privilege is not, if I say that, I'm privileged because I'm white, that doesn't mean that I've had everything easy in life specifically because I'm white.
Right.
It just means that I have access to certain things that non-white people don't, or that, my default position in society is a little bit higher on the social ladder than someone who isn't. And something that's important, I think, to point that out, is that that's not a knock on someone's character to
Right.
say that you have privilege, that, I'm privileged because I'm white, or I'm privileged in that I am binary identified as a trans person. Those are certain things that place me a little higher on the social ladder than people who aren't. And that's not a knock on my personality or that I'm a bad person. It's just a realistic view of my place in society. And it's ignoring that privilege, or what you do with that privilege, that gives it moral weight.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks, part of the reason they react a bit negatively to being called privileged is because they might be speaking to someone from another group that they're not in. Like a gay person might be telling a straight person they're privileged, or a black person might be telling a white person they're privileged, and they're taking it as an insult. And like you said, it's not being privileged or having privilege is not a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing when you're blind to it and you ignore it, and that causes you to not care about how other groups are suffering from lack of privilege.
Exactly. So, in what's hard oftentimes is when you're talking about, when you're talking about one group who is traditionally marginalized. Like, we can talk about feminism for a second,
Mm-hmm.
and for some people who spend their entire lives doing feminism, they may not be able to turn around and look at, if they're white, they may not be able to turn around and look at, white feminism and how so often the mainstream feminist movement has completely ignored people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you start running into things like, well, we're all in this together. Why should we further divide each other? And that's kind of missing the point, because the point is that those divisions exist, and that's the problem in the first place. And erasing those divisions erasing the fact that those divisions exist is the problem.
Yeah, and privilege typically exists as a blinder, because you can't see something that you've always seen your entire life. There's a quote, I can't remember where I heard this from, and I mentioned this on Unbuckling the Bible Belt too recently, that the last thing a fish would ever discover is water.
Right.
And that sort of applies to us too. So that's the thing that really privilege is invisible to you because you don't have the experiences of other groups. So you can't see their experiences unless they're pointed out to you, and you have to be willing to listen and be willing to explore the experiences of other people in order to see how those blinders exist in your own life.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, one of the things that made me first friend you on Facebook was we were in a comment thread, and I was like, yeah, he's saying some stuff that I agree with. I'm going to go stalk his profile. And you had a quote picture there that said something about where privilege exists, blindness exists, or something or blind
Mm-hmm.
spots exist. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, that is so profound. And that's what it is. I think there are so many people who haven't necessarily been exposed to life on the other side of the tracks. Mm-hmm. And wearing blinders is exactly the perfect metaphor for that, because it's not, there are plenty of people who probably just don't know that those things exist. It's not that they don't care or that they're bad people. It's just that they literally don't know, because in their world, certain things like, gay people or trans people or, the poverty that people of color face, those things just don't exist in their world, because it's something that's just so foreign. They might as well live on a different planet.
Yeah. One example that I like to use is a straight person probably doesn't think very often about their safety when they're out in public with their lover, just in terms of showing physical affection. If they're out in the city or in a park or something, straight folks generally don't really think twice about holding hands with each other and showing affection, because it's a normal thing that's okay for them to do. This is not a normal thing for gay people to be able to do in a lot of situations, and so that could be considered privilege and how it acts as a blinder. Gay folks, I can speak for myself and my boyfriend. We have to kind of scan our environment, when we're out in public to make sure that, or, at least to size up the situation and say, is this a safe place to hold hands, or is this not a safe place to hold hands? Is this a safe place for folks to have a visual of us being together? Those are things that we have to think about, because unfortunately, homophobic violence is something that we have to worry about. So that's just one example of how privilege acts as a blinder. I don't think any straight person, in their right mind would say, well, that's not true. But even though they care about it, until it's pointed out to them, that's probably something they never even think about. And
You'd be
that's pretty much the
surprised.
basis of privilege.
I have talked to so many people who have such rose-colored glasses on about being gay in the United States, and how, well, it's totally accepted now. I don't know what they're complaining about, and that kind. I mean, even before the marriage equality ruling, you would see these people in conversations about issues that gay people face around violence and being able to be denied service at places and that kind of thing. And you would see so many people like, I don't know what everyone's complaining about. We live in a society where being gay is totally accepted now. I don't get, and, I think that point of view probably strays over into the, I think that because I think gay people are icky kind of thing.
Maybe. I see the same thing. People say the same thing about racism because we have a black president, or they say the same thing about women because we have laws that protect women. But those people are conflating what the law says. The law may protect us, but that doesn't mean that culture accepts us in all across the board.
Well, right. And that's, in defining what privilege is and is not, I think it's important to point out that, there are people who are part of traditionally marginalized groups that may have significant privileges that the rest may not. I mean, speaking of Caitlyn Jenner, being trans obviously takes you down pretty far on the ladder of, your place in society, but she's also fabulously wealthy. So that kind of erases some of that disadvantage. And, I think the same can be said. That's why you see people like Ben Carson, who he's a black guy, but he talks about racism like he's a white, rich politician. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it's because he's wealthy. Because he doesn't have to live in that world, where most people do. So, I think that's an explanation for that. And I think that's probably an explanation for, I've met trans people who are homophobic, which, that just absolutely blew my mind. That makes zero sense to me.
Yeah.
And I have to believe that it's just because, you spend your entire life concentrating on this one thing and you never think about intersectionality, bringing that back around. You never think that like, wow, this, there's some commonality here. Especially among, the LGBT community. I've said before, and I stand behind it, that every flavor of discrimination against queer or trans people is gender-based. All of it.
Yes, I agree.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that. I read an article where a trans person was like, I don't think we should be lumped in with the LGBT movement. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, okay, one, where are we going to get money for our own movement from? Because there are so few of us. But two, our problems in society stem from the same place. So why are we not working together on this? We can definitely acknowledge and point out that yes, we do face different issues, but the root of those issues is the same. I think trans people bear the brunt of that gender discrimination, and and we face harder issues because of it, but that doesn't mean that the effects don't reach out to other people and that we can't work together with other people on solving those core problems.
I agree. And, speaking of myself, being gay puts me at a disadvantage in our society, but I'm also cisgender. So that makes my life easier just by default than a transgender person. I am a male. again, that gives me advantages fresh out of the box that women don't enjoy. And that's another case of intersectionality. And most people, I mean, unless you're a rich, heterosexual, cisgender man living in America,
and Christian,
and Christian, yeah, which there are plenty of people who fit that description. But that kind of puts you at the very top, and then like as you deviate from those things, you kind of get lower and lower and lower on the social scale.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. In the next segment, we are going to talk about how privilege manifests in our daily lives. More Gay Theist Manifesto coming up.
I'm Daniel Radcliffe, and I believe that reaching out for help is the bravest thing a person can do. If you are struggling and need support, call the Trevor Lifeline at 1-866-488-7386. It's free and confidential, and trained counselors are there to listen 24/7 without judgment. To learn more about the Trevor Project's life-saving work for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning young people, go to thetrevorproject.org.
Visit secularmediagroup.com to see how we're changing the world.
And before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Thank you all so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gay Theist Manifesto have access to all sorts of cool stuff, like a big shout out on the show, premium content, including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons-only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto to become a part of this movement and support this show. Thank you. Welcome back to the Gay Theist Manifesto. Today we are unpacking privilege. And for the next couple of minutes, we are going to talk about how privilege manifests in our daily lives and how it affects how we navigate the world. Daniel, what do you got?
Well, I've said it before. Typically, okay, so some things are more visible than others. Of course, if you're gay, that's not as easy to see in most cases as if you're black or if you're a woman. But being gay definitely affects my day-to-day reality. It affects how I behave in public, especially when I'm with my boyfriend. And not to say that I actively try to hide it, but again, like I said earlier, I typically have to size up the situation in my environment and the folks who are around me and act accordingly. And being an atheist maybe affects my day-to-day on a different level. I tend to surround myself, and I'll really only talk about atheism with folks who are fairly open-minded to begin with. I don't do internet arguments anymore about that sort of thing. But, I am, like I said earlier, I'm a cisgender dude. So there are a lot of situations that I don't really even have to think about. And, walking, if I'm out in public doing my thing, that women and especially transgender people have to think about. And these are things that don't even cross my mind.
Yeah, I think that's super important to point out. Like being able to take for granted your safety, and that's not to say that. Okay, so one thing that I think we forgot to bring up I forgot to bring up in the last segment was that pointing out a disadvantage that I have or that Daniel has, or pointing out an advantage that someone else has, does not mean that I'm the only one with problems. That is not what it's about.
Right.
So when I say these are things that I deal with, the wrong response is, well, you're not the only one. Yes, I know, I get it. But we're having a conversation about privilege as it relates to atheism and the LGBT movement. Mm-hmm. So just wanted to get that out of the way. So generally speaking, most people, when they go out, aren't necessarily worried about their safety, or at least it's a concern that's minor in the back of their heads. For someone like me, it's almost the first thing I think about, especially when I'm entering a place that I've never gone into before. I have heard so many stories from people that I know about, physical assault and, being accosted and yelled at by people. Like, these things are not, it's not like this happens over in, some backward third world country. Like, this is stuff that happens in my city to people that I know. So when I go out in public, my safety is something that's always on my mind. And I mean, kind of moving down the hierarchy of privilege there, first it's as a trans person. Second, it's as a woman. And then it goes back to being as a trans person, because I've heard stories where a trans woman will go out, she'll get pursued by men who plan to rape her, then find out she's trans, and then she ends up getting killed because she's trans. Because, because these guys all of a sudden think like, oh my gosh, I was attracted to a man, because obviously they're idiots about trans issues. Right. And then they feel like, oh, well, now I have wounded pride because I'm somehow gay because I like a trans person. And the trans person in that situation ends up dead. So, I mean, that thought crosses my mind anytime I'm outside in the dark. And especially if I'm by myself. And, I mean, that's something that even cis women have to deal with. Mm-hmm. So, in all of these things, not having to worry about these things or having very little worry about these things is a privilege.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you're talking about how the trans movement does have a place alongside the gay movement. And you were talking about how trans people, the trans woman who gets beat up or killed because they find out she's trans. There's a lot of homophobic violence that, hate crimes against gay people that comes from similar mentalities, from men who think that either a gay man somehow insults their masculinity or calls their masculinity into question, or they themselves are struggling with being gay or being bi, and they can't handle those feelings, so they project them outwards through violence toward gay people.
Yeah, absolutely. One conversation that I have often is, people will say things like, well, we don't need to group each other off any more than that. We're just being divisive, and we're just dividing each other more. And you typically hear these arguments from people who refuse to call themselves feminist for that reason. And they'll say stuff like, well, I'm a humanist. I just want equality for everyone.
Right.
And in an ideal world, yeah, I mean, that would be the thing. But, that erases where the actual problem is.
Yeah, and it also assumes that there's a one-size-fits-all solution to everything, which obviously there isn't. Exactly.
And so, being able to have that point of view is a manifestation of privilege. And that's in conversations surrounding any issue. When everything from religion to race to sexuality to gender to economic status, education, all of those things. That's a manifestation of privilege.
Yeah, and I found a good way to explore your own privilege because, like I said earlier, privilege acts as a blinder. It makes things that other people experience invisible to us because we don't experience them. So, that's pretty simple to understand. But what's not so simple is if I do have privilege, how do I become aware of it? How do I explore it? And I think a good way to explore your own privilege is to consider how often you think about being treated unfairly or feeling scared or feeling anxious purely due to your race, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, your socioeconomic status, your religious status, things like that. And if you find yourself not thinking very often or at all about one or more of those things, then chances are you're on the privileged side of them.
Wow, that's a great way to put it. I never really thought of it like that before. I knew I kept you around for a reason.
Because we finally figured it out. But talked to a lot of folks who I've talked to a lot of women, a lot of black people, a lot of trans people, a lot of poor people, just about their experiences, because I want to know, I want to see where I want to see the things that I can't see. And I can only see them through the stories of other people telling me about their experiences. And I found that the sort of common denominator is, and even comparing that to my own experience as a gay man, the common denominator is putting a lot of energy into thinking about things that the rest of us don't really think about.
Yeah, I hear that. One thing that happens a lot, I think, and it's kind of what opened my eyes to racism, because until fairly recently, I had some views that I now recognize as being pretty racist. Mm-hmm. And so how this would happen is, when I came out and started actually, being open about being trans and talking about the issues that trans people face, I would get a lot of things, people who aren't trans, don't even know trans people, telling me how I should feel about my experience and how I should handle my experience. And I was like, would that
be cis-splaining?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I would run into that surprisingly often. Like, I was shocked. Like, I'm the only trans person in the conversation, and you're not gonna just be like, oh, okay, well, you probably know more about it than I do. Maybe I should just listen to you. And I was just shocked that was a phenomenon that happened. And then I would go into conversations about race, and I would see white people doing the same thing to black people. And
men doing it to women.
Exactly. So, and this will play a little more into the ally segment later on, where we're talking about how to weaponize your privilege. But I think it's super important to recognize that when you're in these conversations and someone says something that makes you feel uncomfortable, your first reaction should be that, I'm running up against my comfort zone, probably because of a privilege that I have, and maybe I should just hang out and listen for a minute before I jump in with my opinion, because, at the end of the day, speaking for myself, at the end of the day, my views on race are nothing but mildly educated opinions, because I'm not there. I've never been there, and I'll never be there. Right. So it's not something that I can say, yes, I've been there, I experienced this, so I can speak to this experience. And so in those conversations, my job is to listen. And, and like I said, that overlaps a little in the next segment, but that's okay. But yeah, those conversations where, well, the gay community should do this coming from a straight guy, or, the black community should do this coming from white people. Those things are all huge manifestations of privilege.
Yeah, especially when they're downplaying the experiences that are being told happen, and saying either A, well, no, I don't think that exists, or I don't see it, so I think you're exaggerating. That's the worst thing you can do when you're in a position of privilege and someone is telling you about their experiences.
Yeah, well, actually, a black friend of mine posted something that it made me better as an ally, because I was guilty of this. And what she was saying is, when someone says, hey, this incredibly racist thing happened to me, don't be the person that's like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened still. Mm-hmm. Because, there are people who experience these things every day, and it is absolutely a manifestation of privilege to act like you're so surprised by these things, like you don't understand that racism still happens.
And one of the things that I think, if you're a woman, if you're a black person, if you're gay or trans or any combination of those, something that you probably hear a lot is, you're too sensitive.
Oh God.
And these are virtually every time coming from, if it's a woman, then it's usually a man telling her she's too sensitive, or a white person telling a black person they're too sensitive.
Right. Why can't you just laugh at my rape joke?
Right. It's just a joke, things like that. Grow thicker skin, things like that. And it's, it shouldn't be our jobs as human beings to become callous and cynical. That seems to be the solution that people point out to you, instead of saying, well, folks should listen more and not be so terrible. The solution that is often presented is, well, you should grow a thicker skin, and you may as well tell someone to grow a few inches taller. It's not as simple as just growing a thicker skin. Things hurt, and they hurt for a reason.
Well, yeah, my response is always, well, why don't you just be more sensitive?
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with that?
What is wrong with that? Seriously. And that's something that, for some reason, we have a cultural stigma against sensitivity.
Oh, of course we do, because that's a woman's thing. Men don't do that. Yeah.
Right. And of course, because it is a thing that's typically attributed to women, nurturing, sensitivity, understanding, and compromise. Of course, we devalue it because that's just woman's stuff. But I mean, really, how much better would the world be if everyone were a little more sensitive and a little slower to say, instead of saying, I don't see that, so I don't think it happens, or you're just too sensitive. How about just listening and saying, wow, I'd never thought of that. I don't see that in my life. Tell me more about your experiences with that.
Something we don't hear a whole lot about, and maybe we don't talk about it enough on this show because we stay so LGBT focused, but Christian privilege.
Yes.
Daniel, you mentioned something you wanted to make sure we talked about that. So tell me what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, and this goes in line with the fact that, I've said it before, I'm not an atheist because I think it's the intellectually superior position. I'm an atheist because I care about the harm that religion does to our society, right? So I think now that we have laws like the marriage equality decision from the Supreme Court and laws that protect gay people and all LGBT folks, Christians are feeling pretty persecuted, probably now more than ever. But I think folks need to realize that Christianity is definitely a privileged position in our country compared to atheism. Christianity is the most prevalent and embraced religion in America.
78% of the country, I think.
Yeah. Christian monuments and religious displays like giant crosses or nativity scenes typically don't inspire wrath and hatred in the community. If you think about things like, an atheist group putting up a billboard, that's typically going to be met with a lot more anger and ire than a Christian organization putting up a giant cross or nativity scene in a public space, right?
Well, yeah, the difference between the reactions in that situation is marked, I think. When an atheist puts up a billboard that says something like, you don't have to go to church on Sunday, you're not alone as an atheist, all of a sudden there is a damn war on Christianity. Right. And we're attacking their religious beliefs and all that. But when a Christian monument goes up, first of all, if it's not in a government space, you're not really going to hear anything from atheists anyways. But if it's in on government property, the worst thing that happens is a sternly worded letter from the Freedom from Religion Foundation or something like that. That's the worst an atheist is going to attack a religious monument is, hey, this is unconstitutional. Speaking of privilege, that's kind of the epitome of that when we're saying, hey, this is unconstitutional. Apparently that's an unprecedented attack on faith. But, right. When they shove it in our faces, it's just, it's no big deal. It's every day. It's what we do.
Yeah. And that's such a telling sign of a privileged versus a non-privileged group, because usually if you're in the atheist camp, you're kind of used to society being a little iffy about you. When you're in the Christian camp, you might be more resigned to feeling that it's acceptance of you is something that you are owed by society. So that's why when Christians, and of course I'm talking about some Christians, not all Christians, but when some Christians might see an atheist billboard and freak out about their religious freedom being infringed upon. They're the same folks who might see a giant cross and think nothing of it. But if I say, hey, I used to live in a place where there was a giant, and this, it must have been 30, 40 feet tall, like full-on crucifix, metal crucifix with, the image of Jesus hanging from it and everything. And, I didn't rally together an army to pull it down or to have it taken down even. But every time I pass it, I'm like, it's morbid. I don't want to see that. That's something that, I don't want to have to look at. But...
Well, right, a Bronze Age torture device as a symbol of your religion, but that's another episode.
So, obviously you can call yourself a Christian. That's way more widely acceptable than calling oneself an atheist. And the other, there's an important side to that in that there's way less of a chance of discrimination in family and work environments if you profess to be a Christian versus an atheist. I mean, being an atheist can cost you job opportunities. It can cost you family relationships.
If anyone missed the interview with Sandy from the last episode, she talks about being an atheist in Alabama and some pretty awful stuff that's happened to her, including being turned down for a job just because of being atheist, and not necessarily being atheist, but not being afraid to be open about it.
Right. Yeah, Sandy's awesome. If anyone hasn't listened to that interview Callie did with her, you should check it out. I think it's episode 20.
Yeah, it's the one right before this. Yeah.
Yeah. I looked up some statistics. I was just interested in what the numbers were. Only 54% of Americans would vote for an atheist presidential candidate. All issues aside, with issues not even being in the picture, just the fact that they were an atheist, only just over half of Americans would vote for them.
Yeah, there was a study. I think it was a Canadian study. So I'm not sure if this reflects attitudes in the United States, but they were trying to rate different types of people and how they were trusted by society. And I think atheists rated literally like 1% above convicted rapists.
Right. It seems so insane, especially considering when you look at what atheism is, it's just a lack of a belief. I think some religious folks tend to want to dogmatize atheism and say, well, if you're an atheist, that must mean that
straw man is the word that you're looking for. Straw man.
Straw man. So it's kind of weird, but obviously, all of our presidents in recent history have been Christian. That's not even an issue. In fact, that's highlighted by the fact that even though President Obama is obviously a Christian, not a Muslim, just the idea that he might be a Muslim was enough to enrage a big portion of our country, which is also insane. And I think it sends just a terrible message just to Muslim kids who look at things like that and say, well, I guess I can't be president. That's something that I can't be when I grow up. But it just goes to show you that being a Christian just kind of puts you in the default, in the norm. It's not something that anyone considers. It's only considered if you're not a Christian in a lot of our social situations and amongst
or
our
the
society.
wrong kind of Christian.
I haven't figured out whether. I mean, there definitely are so many different flavors of Christianity, but I can't think of one that's.
You see that often with progressive faith traditions. I mean, I think it was a Lutheran church that just ordained a trans minister, which is, that's a big step for a trans person to be installed as a minister of a church in a major religious organization. That's a huge deal. But, at the same time, you look at what most Christian people think of that kind of thing. And obviously I'm not going to try to be like, well, these are the true Christians and these are the not true Christians,
right.
Because I don't think you can call yourself a Christian without cherry picking, because of the obviously contradictory stuff. Yeah.
Right. And obviously you don't have to be a Christian to be transphobic or homophobic, but,
that is true.
But religion has pretty much inspired that hatred for gay and trans people. So
I think religion is the easiest lubricant for that attitude, if that makes sense. It's definitely not the only one, but I definitely think it's the thing that leads most easily to it, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, definitely. And you look at a lot of our current laws, especially like the controversy we've had these last few years with LGBT rights, whether work protections or marriage equality and things like that. These are all laws that really were originally when they were working against us, were rooted in religious principles that had no place in our government and in our society. Now our leaders are catching up, and our Supreme Court's realizing that we can't discriminate just because we always have. So these laws are changing, and of course, the Christians who are upset about these changes are saying, well, this is the government impeding on our religious freedom, and this is the government telling God he's wrong, and things like that. And again, it's such a disgusting manifestation of privilege in that case, because literally what's happening is the playing field is just being evened. That's all. We're not being given special rights. We're just leveling the playing field, and that's enough to make religious folks, or Christians in particular, freak out, because they've been in a position of privilege for so long that anything that knocks them down a peg, they're going to see as an attack.
Right. Well, and that's I don't know who originated the quote, but it's something like, when you've had an unjustified privilege for so long, losing that privilege starts to look like oppression to you.
Yes, I mean, we see that as I'm sure that you see it too. Feminists see that a lot amongst men who clearly aren't feminists, who see just treating women like people as some sort of attack against masculinity and the whole male gender. Right.
Well, yeah, we could probably go for an hour on that, and I definitely want to do an episode on feminism. So maybe that's a conversation for another day.
Sure.
So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back with Be a Better Ally on the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Here's an excerpt from Nailed by David Fitzgerald.
Didn't there have to have been a Jesus? Perhaps he was just a wandering teacher or an exorcist, an apocalyptic prophet or a zealot who opposed the Romans. Perhaps he was all these things, or even a composite of several such early first-century figures. But at any rate, surely there had to be somebody at the original core of Christianity, arguably the most famous individual in human history. All this seems to be a perfectly reasonable, completely natural assumption to make, so why would anyone be so foolish as to propose that Jesus never existed? Doesn't it just make more sense to assume that there was a historical Jesus, even if we're unable to recover the real facts about his life and death? As it turns out, no. The opposite is true. The closer we look at the evidence for Jesus, the less solid evidence we find, and the more we find suspicious silences and curious resemblances to the pagan and Jewish religious ideas and philosophies that preceded Christianity. And once you begin to parse out the origins of this tradition or that teaching from their various sources, the sweater begins unraveling quickly until it becomes very difficult to buy that there ever was, or even could have been, any historical figure at the center.
Nailed by David Fitzgerald is now available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
I'm Dustin.
And I'm Wesley.
We host the Atheist Nomads podcast.
We're godless geeks who take a skeptical look at
politics, religion, science, technology, and history.
We also interview leaders in the atheist, skeptic, and humanist community.
Check us out at atheistnomads.com.
That's atheistnomads.com.
Welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto. This week's Be a Better Ally segment is called Weaponize Your Privilege. So what we want to talk about are ways that folks who have positions of privilege in one way or another, how we can use that to solve these problems that we're all trying to solve. So, Daniel, ideas?
I feel like whenever we talk about being a better ally, because being an ally kind of is about using your privilege to help another group.
Yeah, as a broad statement, absolutely.
So yeah, things that come off the top of my head are, first of all, voting. When you're voting, whether it's local government or for the president or for Congress, make sure that you're really informed on the issues, and that you know where they stand on a majority of their issues, not just the things that directly affect you. Just be aware of that, and vote accordingly. Yeah, it's a really simple thing that can have a powerful effect on turning the cultural tide regarding how groups, like whether it's LGBT folks, women, black people, you name it. What about you? What do you got, Callie?
Well, I think for me, I think the most basic thing a person can do is just listen. Mm-hmm. And like, obviously we all have opinions, right? I have opinions. I have strong opinions. That's why I do a podcast.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to know what informs those opinions, and whether or not, where my position is coming from is the best place to form those opinions, or if maybe I need to just stop and listen to what other people are saying. That was how I learned to get rid of the really problematic ideas surrounding race that I had, was I just stopped talking, and I would go into these conversations and not try to, throw in my input immediately, but to just listen to what people were saying. And when someone says, hey, this is my lived experience, actually just believing that and internalizing that and saying, okay, well, that's part of their narrative. And, it's not something that I know a ton about or something that I've ever experienced. So regardless of what my feelings are on the issue, I probably should just go with what they're saying. It's the same thing with, if you're an atheist, right? A lot of times if you're arguing with a creationist, one of the first things that you're going to bring up is, well, like, the people whose job it is to study these things for a living overwhelmingly accept the theory of evolution, or accept the Big Bang Theory, or accept, climate change as being man-made, because those people are the experts. They know more about those fields than I do. Right. So if I'm to say that they're wrong, I have to have a pretty special position and pretty special knowledge to be able to go against that. And, that's not saying that they couldn't possibly ever be wrong, but you also have to understand what you're up against when, so many people in the same position with the same knowledge and the same expertise come to the same conclusion. And I think it's the same thing when we're talking about privilege, when, as a cis person, if you go into a conversation where, trans people are having a conversation, and, and they're saying things about, well, cis people this and cis people that, your default reaction may be to jump in and say, not all cis people, hashtag, but, that's not necessarily the right response, because I think one of the things that's the least helpful in these conversations is jumping in and saying not all men, not all white people, not all cis people, not all straight people. We get that. We're not stupid.
Right.
I, as a trans person, understand that not all cis people are against me, and that not all cis people are the problem. Mm-hmm. But what is the problem is people climbing over themselves to point out how they're not part of the problem, as opposed to trying to solve it.
Yes, and that's something that I see often, especially for folks who say, well, I don't have a problem with gay people, so I'm not an active part of the problem. And to them I say, that's great. You're halfway there. What can you do? What are you willing to do to be part of the solution as well? And part of the solution, I think, in addition to some of the things that we've been talking about, is just sharing information. When you, of course, obviously, every person who's part of a disenfranchised minority group is not going to have the same experiences. But you'll find that the more that you listen to them, the more they start to paint a picture. But there's this Facebook page, I'm sure almost everyone's heard of it, it's called Humans of New York. You know this one, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Humans of New York. If you're not familiar with that page, just look it up on Facebook and follow it. That's such a great way to get... He does these photographs of people, just random people he finds in New York and sometimes other countries. And he just documents a slice of their life that they're willing to talk about. And I think that's another way to sort of paint, this cultural picture in your mind of what certain groups are going through.
Yeah, actually, there was one that kind of broke the internet was a kid. He looked like he was maybe 12 or 13, and he's sitting on a stoop crying. And the quote under the picture was, I'm homosexual and I don't know what that's going to mean for my life.
Yeah, that people won't like him, and that right. And it's
so powerful.
Yeah. So if you're one of these people who finds yourself saying, "Well, I'm not against gay people. I'm not against trans people. I'm not a racist. What can I do?" There's so much you can do. And when Callie says weaponizing your privilege, obviously weaponize it to be a force for good. That's what that means. But it just means be a part of the conversation. Take part in these conversations. Talk to people. Be willing to share the information you've learned from your gay friends, your trans friends, your black friends, your friends who are women. Be willing to share those experiences, not on a personal level, but just say, hey, I have seen this happening. As a man, I have seen this happening to women, and I have seen a lot of women talking about this. Just be willing to share that information with other people. That's a great way to be an ally.
Yeah, and that doesn't even necessarily mean be an activist. That doesn't mean go out and hold protest signs and lobby Congress and speak up at city hall meetings. Like that's not everybody's thing, and I have no grudge with that. But I mean, just everyday conversation. I mean, elevating your consciousness. People realize when you do that. For example, there are some non-binary trans people and even some women who don't like it when people say "you guys."
Yeah, that's something that came to my attention just recently.
Yeah,
and again, I had never even thought about it, but now I do think about it.
Exactly. So that's why you'll hear me say friends or folks or everyone or you all, because I want to be inclusive, and it's really not that hard to change a language habit like that to be more inclusive, and the inconvenience that it causes you to make little changes like that. Is absolutely nothing compared to how it can help the people around you and make them feel more included and make them feel more welcome. One thing that a journey that I've taken as far as privilege goes is, so a lot of times in queer and trans groups, the norm is that when we get together and we start talking, we introduce ourselves with our name and pronouns. So no one has to assume, so nobody gets it wrong, because, as we know, someone's presentation, whatever their presentation is stereotypically, may not necessarily be what their identity is, and that's okay. And you don't want to make assumptions. You always, so it just makes sense when we're in a room, we get together. My name's Callie. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And at first I sort of bristled at that.
Oh, really?
Because it's super affirming to me when someone genders me correctly without me telling them to do it.
Gotcha.
Because that's someone who just recognizes me as me. Mm-hmm. But then I thought, wow, that's a really selfish attitude. Because, first of all, not everyone's presentation stereotypically matches what their identity is. And also, for non-binary folks who prefer, they, them, their pronouns, that's not necessarily something that's obvious. So, and I mean, I've gotten over that, but, the journey that it took for me to be like, well, that's a wrong-headed attitude for me to have, especially in queer and trans spaces. That's a wrong-headed attitude for me to have, because it's a privilege to me that, my presentation, generally speaking, does match my identity as far as what society thinks that it should be. I identify as a woman and I have a pretty stereotypically feminine presentation. And that's a privilege that I have, that a lot of other people don't. So, it was a pretty selfish thing for me to say, well, I want this because it makes me uncomfortable, despite despite the harm that it can do to other people, especially in queer and trans spaces. So, I mean, that was something that I had to confront and get over.
Yeah, and isn't that what it's about? Especially in cases of being an ally, but just making people feel that the world can be a safe space for them. I know that I have recently, when someone invites me to do an interview with them on their show, and my being gay is sort of a central aspect of my reason for being on the show, I like to introduce myself as a cisgender gay person. Not because I think that everyone needs to know that I'm cis and not trans, but because I want to sort of help turn the idea around that cis is normal, and that, I guess another way of saying it,
there's everyone, and then there's trans people.
right, it's trans people and normal people.
Right.
I don't want to be a part of continuing that paradigm, because trans people are important to me, and they matter to me. So that's just a small thing that I do. It's not for me. It's because I want to be a part of making the world a more welcoming place for trans people.
Yeah, and it's little stuff like that. I mean, and honestly, I mean, you think about how much effort it took for you to do that versus what it's going to mean to the trans people in your life. That
zero effort.
Right. That now being around you is that much more of a safer space than it was before. You know, not that any trans person I feel like has to worry about being safe with you, but but just that, like, wow, like, here's someone who really, really gets it, For
me, another thing about introducing myself as a cisgender person is because I want people to say, what is cisgender? And to kind of be curious about it and to want to learn more about it.
That's awesome.
And because I remember the first time I heard the term cisgender, and it was only a few years ago. It was like June of 2013. And I remember thinking, what? I've never heard this word. What is it? And then when I looked it up, it just kind of opened my eyes to something, again, being a privileged cisgender person I just never thought about. I'm like, I never thought about it, because we tend to think of ourselves as being normal. And
because your gender identity is the default.
Is the default, right? So I like to pique people's curiosity, and I hope that's the effect that it's having.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I mean, something else surrounding that word. I mean, I think the use of that word, I think, is a really great jumping off point for, discussing about privilege too, because what you'll hear oftentimes, even in, spaces who are generally trans inclusive, is that they take being called cisgender as an insult.
Which is ridiculous. Come on.
Right. So the entire purpose of the word cisgender is to normalize being transgender, right. to take away this attitude that there are all the normal people and then there are trans people. It's like, no, there are cis people and there are trans people, and both are okay. It just describes a different aspect of who a person is.
Right. They're descriptive labels. Exactly.
And I think, a lot of people feel insulted by that. And again, that's a manifestation of privilege. Is I've been able to think of myself as the default person, as the normal person forever. And now I'm like, oh wait, like, I have to think a little bit more deeply about who I am and my place in society. I think that's a manifestation of privilege. And you brought up labels. And I think labels are a great place to end this segment. Sure. Oftentimes in conversations like these, and usually in the same conversation where somebody's talking about how, why do we further divide each other? Why do we create these groups and separate ourselves from each other? When the reality of the situation is that we are already grouped off and we are already separated, and all we're doing is forming solidarity around those groups and pointing out the problems that we face in those groups. So you often hear the same thing about labels, and how, when you label someone, that's, sort of divisive. Again, there's a manifestation of privilege, because what a lot of people don't understand is that, so many people grow up being the default person and having themselves constantly affirmed as, well, my experience is the default experience. And I remember sort of having my awakening with being trans when I was a preteen, and I didn't know what the word transgender was. Right. And once I found out there was a word for it, because once there's a word for something, it's normal. Or maybe not normal, but it's something that,
it's like real.
It's real, yeah. And you know that you're not the only one, and you know that you're not alone. So I think people can discount the power of labels, especially for things that are that are really sort of, I don't want to say rare. I mean, I guess rare is the right word, because, I mean, the trans population is a very small percentage of the population. But for, when we grow up in a world where we don't hear about these things, finding out that there are other people like us and that there's a word for what I am, that was a super happy thing for me.
Yeah.
So I think I'm okay with labels. My mantra is labels, not boxes. Labels are okay, boxes aren't.
Exactly. Be who you are. Don't let the label be the entirety of who you are. Be yourself and be true to yourself. But, the thing with labels is, especially when, I'll make this brief because I think we may have touched on it, but I think when you're in a group that isn't privileged, labels can be useful because you realize that's the point where we have work to do. A lot of people say, why do we have to call it gay marriage? Let's just call it marriage. And I get that, it's a sweet sentiment, but the truth is, because just marriage, quote, unquote,
right? Because gay people are the ones that weren't allowed to do it.
Yeah, just marriage doesn't need help. Gay folks are the ones who need help. So that's also a reason why we use labels and why they're important to folks, especially when you're not living on the privileged end of things.
All right, well, my friends, that is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. I want to say thank you to my co-host Daniel.
My pleasure.
And you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCali.
And I'm on Twitter at Daniel Wolfsong.
And you can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, and knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.